Her legs started to weaken, and someone said it's normal for her age. That's a dangerous lie that you unknowingly carried. There is a mechanism that starts long before the first difficulty to climb a step, and it has nothing to do with tiredness, sedentary lifestyle, or lack of vitamins. By the age of 50, you may have already lost up to 20% of your leg muscle strength without realizing it, and what scares you is not the number. That's what this loss represents for your brain, for your heart, and for the number of years you'll still live autonomously. What you've done so far to strengthen your legs may be fueling the very process that eats away at your muscles from within. Observe this carefully because there is a silent inflammatory mechanism that first installs itself in the large muscles of the legs, like a termite that starts at the base of the house, and when you feel the first signs, the structure has already been compromised. The thighs, which are the body's largest reservoir of amino acids, begin to release substances into the bloodstream that cross the barrier that protects the brain and trigger a degenerative trigger that medicine is only now beginning to understand. Pay attention to this detail because it changes everything. Your legs don't weaken on their own. They are the first to shout a cry for help that the rest of the body is still whispering. And if you understand exactly what to put on your plate for your next few meals, there's a window of opportunity that modern nutritional science has mapped out to reverse what seemed irreversible. Think about the extent of this for a moment. Every year that passes after the age of 40, you lose between 1 and 2% of muscle mass. So far, nothing new. But what no one tells us in the 15-minute consultation is that the speed of this loss is not the same throughout the body. The legs lose first and lose faster. The quadriceps muscles, that large mass in the front of the thigh, can atrophy up to 3 times faster than the arm muscles. And the mechanism behind this is not a lack of exercise, although exercise helps. It's a combination of low-grade inflammation, mitochondrial dysfunction, and anabolic resistance that turns the protein you eat into blood sugar instead of turning it into muscle. This is the real enemy. Not age, not time, but a cell signaling failure that makes your body literally eat your own leg muscles for fuel while accumulating fat where it shouldn't. And here's what almost no one explains. This fat doesn't just stay under the skin. It seeps inside the muscle between the fibers as intramuscular fat, and the more fat inside the muscle, the weaker it gets and the more inflammation it produces. It is a self-destructive cycle that feeds itself. You wake up more tired. You feel your legs are heavy. You think you slept badly, that it's stress, that it's the weather. But it's your muscle slowly being replaced by tissue that doesn't generate force, doesn't burn energy, and has poisoned the surrounding environment. My friends, I want you to carry 2 questions as we move forward. The first, what's the cheapest, most neglected food that can turn off the inflammatory switch that's draining the strength out of your legs? The second, what is the mistake that most people over 50 make every day when preparing this food, and that completely nullifies the benefit it could bring? These 2 questions will be answered with real physiological mechanisms, with studies published in high-impact journals, and with something that you can apply to your next meal. I'm not talking about expensive supplements. I'm not talking about extreme diets. I'm talking about 6 specific foods that act on distinct but complementary metabolic pathways that have been studied in elderly populations with results that surprised even the researchers themselves. But before I get to them, I need to show you what's really going on inside the muscle fibers of your legs right now. Inside every muscle cell are thousands of tiny power plants called mitochondria. When you're young, these plants are plentiful, efficient, and multiply easily. After the age of 50, a process called mitochondrial dysfunction begins to accelerate. Mitochondria start to produce less energy and more free radicals, those unstable molecules that damage everything around. In 2019, a study published in the journal Cell Metabolism showed that mitochondrial dysfunction in the leg muscles precedes the onset of detectable weakness by years. Researchers from Maastricht University in the Netherlands analyzed muscle biopsies from individuals with an average age of 65 years and found fragmented mitochondria with reduced ability to consume oxygen even in people who were still walking normally. What does this mean in practice? It means that the muscle is drowning in fuel that it cannot burn. Glucose and fatty acids enter the cell, but the damaged mitochondria are not able to process them. This excess of unburned fuel generates toxic intermediates that activate inflammatory pathways within the muscle. One of these pathways is called NF-kappa B, a transcription factor that, when activated chronically, sends orders for the cell nucleus to start degrading muscle proteins. It's as if the muscle gets a continuous emergency message telling it to disassemble. and the muscle obeys. It literally begins to digest itself, releasing amino acids into the bloodstream that the liver converts into glucose in a desperate attempt to keep the brain fueled. But the price is the loss of strength, power, autonomy. The first revelation I want to plant in your mind is this. Your muscle isn't just weakening from disuse. It is being actively eroded by an inflammatory program that feeds on itself. And what most people do when their legs feel weaker is to increase their consumption of animal protein from any source, thinking that this will solve it. But if the inflammatory pathway is turned on, much of this extra protein will be converted into glucose by the liver in a process called gluconeogenesis, and what doesn't turn into sugar can be excreted, or, worse, turned into intermediates that overwhelm already sensitive kidneys. I'm not saying that protein is bad. I'm saying that the source, preparation, and follow-up of this protein determines whether it will rebuild muscle or fuel inflammation. And this is exactly where the first food you need to know comes in. Now, I need you to understand something that most doctors don't have time to explain. When muscle begins to be infiltrated by fat, that fat is not inert. It is an active endocrine organ. Adipocytes that settle between muscle fibers secrete adipocytokines, which are inflammatory signaling molecules. Interleukin-6, tumor necrosis factor alpha, resistin. These substances circulate locally and enter the bloodstream. Interleukin-6, for example, when produced by the exercising muscle, is beneficial and anti-inflammatory. But when produced chronically by intramuscular fat, it is pro-inflammatory and is associated with an increased risk of sarcopenia, which is the loss of muscle mass and function. A 2018 study from the University of Nottingham in the United Kingdom, published in the Journal of Cachexia, Sarcopenia, and Muscle, showed that older adults with higher fatty infiltration in the quadriceps had levels of interleukin 6 to 3 times higher than older adults of the same age with clean muscles. And the most alarming? This local inflammation impairs the activation of satellite cells, which are the muscle stem cells responsible for repairing microlesions and building new fibers. Without functioning satellite cells, the muscle loses the ability to regenerate. It's like having an army without replacement soldiers. Every small injury of everyday life, every step, every climb of stairs, accumulates damage that is not repaired, and the muscle withers, fibrous, being replaced by connective tissue and fat. What I am describing is not a process that begins at the age of 80. It starts at 40, 50, and accelerates silently. Most people only realize when they have lost 30, 40% of their strength. And then the system says, do physiotherapy, walk more, take painkillers for pain. But the root of the problem, this intramuscular inflammation fueled by seemingly harmless food choices, no one addresses. Because the 15-minute consultation was not designed to educate, it is designed to diagnose and prescribe. And the food industry was not designed to nurture, it was designed to sell products that last on the shelf and addict the palate. Between these two giants, you have run out of information. But from now on, you'll know exactly what to do. Mrs. Maria Helena, 72 years old, a retired teacher, arrived at the office with a complaint that you will recognize. She said that her legs just didn't obey anymore. She sat on the couch to watch the newspaper, and when it was time to get up, she had to rest both hands on the arms of the couch and give her a push. She was ashamed. I thought it was laziness, lack of willpower. She had already tried walking, had already taken vitamin D, had already done physiotherapy. Nothing seemed to hold back the loss of strength. When we examined her inflammatory markers, her ultrasensitive C-reactive protein was 4 times above the acceptable limit. Interleukin-6, another inflammatory cytokine, was also elevated. And the question that changed everything was, what do you eat for breakfast? She replied, wholemeal bread with margarine and a glass of skim milk. It seemed healthy. But it was exactly this combination that was sabotaging the strength of her legs. Margarine, loaded with trans fats and refined vegetable oils, oxidized cell membranes. Industrialized wholemeal bread, with its gluten and phytic acid, irritated the intestinal mucosa and fed intestinal permeability. Skim milk, without the fat that helps absorb fat-soluble vitamins, provided lactose that quickly converted to glucose. All of this together created an inflammatory environment that her body could not erase. And the first food that began to reverse this situation came from something that her grandmother ate and that she abandoned because she thought it was a thing of the past: the egg. But it's not just any egg. And it is not prepared in any way. The whole egg with yolk, cooked for exactly 7 minutes, contains a molecule called phosphatidylcholine that is a precursor to acetylcholine, the neurotransmitter that connects the nerve to the muscle. Without enough acetylcholine, the brain even sends the order for the leg to move, but the message arrives weak, like an interfering radio signal. The motor plate, which is the connection between the nerve and the muscle fiber, begins to deteriorate in a process that neurologists call age-related denervation. From the age of 60, you can lose up to 40% of the motor units of your legs if nothing is done. And the egg yolk provides the raw material the body needs to maintain the integrity of the myelin sheath, the layer of fat that insulates nerves and allows the electrical impulse to travel at up to 400 kilometers per hour. In addition, the yolk contains choline, which the body converts into citicoline, a compound that in double-blind studies published in the Journal of the American College of Nutrition increased grip strength and gait speed in older adults in just 12 weeks. Pay attention to this specific detail, because it is a memory anchor that you will carry. The temperature of the water and the cooking time determine whether the phosphatidylcholine in the yolk will be available or destroyed. 7 minutes in boiling water, not 6, not 8. 7. The white is completely coagulated, but the yolk remains creamy in the center. This creaminess is not just texture, it is the integrity of phospholipids that have not yet been denatured by excessive heat. If you cook it for 10, 12 minutes, the yolk becomes floury and greenish on the surface. This greenish color is iron sulfide, formed by the reaction of the iron in the yolk with the hydrogen sulfide released by the white. This indicates that oxidation has occurred and that the phospholipids have been damaged. You still eat protein, but you've lost the most valuable part to your nervous and muscular system. The 7-minute egg is a natural medicine that delivers choline, phosphatidylcholine, lutein, zeaxanthin, vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, vitamin K, all B vitamins, selenium, iodine, and the protein with the highest known biological value, with an amino acid score of almost 100%. No supplement can replicate this synergy, but here's the mistake that nullifies everything. Most people over 50 eat the scrambled egg, fried, or worse, just the white. When you fry the egg at a high temperature, the fats in the yolk oxidize and form advanced glycation products, the AGEs, which are the exact same inflammatory compounds that trigger the NF-kappa B pathway that I mentioned earlier. You literally take the food that could save your muscle and turn it into fuel for the inflammation that's destroying your muscle. The white alone, without the yolk, provides protein, but the absorption of this protein without the fats and phospholipids in the yolk is significantly lower. A 2017 study from the University of Illinois showed that consuming the whole egg after exercise increased muscle protein synthesis by 40% more than consuming the egg white alone, with the same amount of protein. The mechanism: the lipids in the yolk modulate the activation of the mTOR pathway, which is the main amino acid sensor within the muscle cell. When you eat only the egg white, mTOR is insufficiently activated and some of the protein ingested is wasted. When you eat the whole egg cooked for 7 minutes, the yolk is still creamy, the phospholipids are intact, the avidin in the white has been neutralized by heat without completely denaturing the proteins, and the nutritional package arrives in your small intestine in the ideal form to be absorbed and directed to the muscles of your legs. So Juan, 64 years old, a retired carpenter, was a man who always had strength in his hands and legs. He told me that he began to feel that his legs were weaker when he realized that he could no longer squat down to pick up a tool on the ground without supporting himself. He had been eating omelet with cheese and ham every day, thinking he was eating well. The omelet was cooked in a frying pan with sunflower oil at a high temperature. The proteins and fats of the egg, subjected to high temperature in the presence of sunflower oil rich in omega-6, formed a massive amount of oxidized lipids and AGEs. These compounds entered his body and activated exactly the inflammation receptors that were eating away at his quadriceps. When he swapped the fried omelet for 3 eggs cooked for 7 minutes for breakfast, along with a slice of avocado and a pinch of salt, within 3 weeks he reported that the feeling of heaviness in his legs had subsided. In 2 months, he was already crouching down to pick up the tool with one hand, the other free. The strength didn't come from new muscles. It came from the inflammation that subsided, allowing the muscles he already had to function again without the inflammatory break. Now imagine what happens inside your body when you consume this egg prepared in the right way. Phosphatidylcholine travels through the blood, crosses the blood-brain barrier, and provides the substrate for acetylcholine synthesis. The nerves that innervate the quadriceps and glutes regain some of their transmission efficiency. At the same time, the amino acids in the egg white, especially leucine, reach the muscle and activate mTOR. Leucine is the trigger amino acid. Without it, even with all the other amino acids present, muscle protein synthesis does not skyrocket. One large egg contains about 600 milligrams of leucine. The threshold dose for significantly activating protein synthesis in the elderly is approximately 2.5 grams per meal. This means that 3 whole eggs provide the necessary amount of leucine to give the rebuilding signal. But the magic is not only in the quantity, it is in synergy with the yolk. Without the yolk, some of this leucine would be diverted to the production of glucose. With the yolk, fatty acids and phospholipids signal the liver to spare amino acids and prioritize distribution to peripheral tissues, especially leg muscles, which have the greatest mass and the highest demand. This is an example of how nature packs nutrients into combinations that the supplement industry tries to copy, but rarely matches. Now, I want to take a break for something important. If you are recognizing any of these situations in your life, if you have ever felt that your legs do not respond as they used to, even doing everything they were told to do, write in the comments the name of the city where you are and how long ago you started noticing weakness in your legs. This creates a community of people who are looking for the same answers and helps me know that this content is reaching those who need it. Enjoy and leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the notifications, because the next food I'm going to reveal is even more neglected and is available at any fair for a derisory price, but almost everyone throws away the most important part. Mr. Manuel, 67 years old, a retired bus driver, arrived with a different complaint. He said that his legs didn't hurt. They didn't tingle. But they just didn't have power anymore. He climbed a slope that he had previously climbed without thinking, and halfway through it felt as if a switch turned off the power to his thighs. He described it as a feeling that the muscle was hollow inside. This description, my friends, is almost poetic and at the same time clinically accurate. The hollow muscle inside is exactly the fatty infiltration that replaces the contractile fibers with adipocytes that do not generate force. We did a muscle ultrasound, and what we saw confirmed the suspicion. There was significant fatty infiltration in the vastus lateralis, one of the quadriceps muscles. His muscle wasn't just smaller. It was being replaced by intramuscular fat, which is metabolically active and produces inflammatory adipocytokines such as interleukin-6 and tumor necrosis factor alpha. These substances circulate locally and worsen anabolic resistance. That is, the muscle receives amino acids but cannot use them to rebuild itself because the inflammatory pathways block the signal. It is as if the mason arrived with the bricks, but the master builder had locked the gate. And the food that began to unlock this gate for Mr. Manuel was something he ate in childhood, but that he had abandoned because he thought it gave gas and was useless. The beetroot. But pay attention to this detail, because it changes everything. Beets are rich in inorganic nitrates that, when ingested, are converted by bacteria that live on the surface of your tongue into nitrite. This nitrite goes down the esophagus, reaches the stomach, and, in contact with the acidic environment, part of it is converted into nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is a gaseous molecule that lasts a few seconds in the bloodstream, but in those few seconds it dilates the vessels, improves blood flow to the muscles, and, most importantly, opens the capillaries that were collapsed due to lack of use and chronic inflammation. The leg muscles of people over the age of 50 often suffer from capillary rarefaction, which is the reduction in the number of small vessels that supply the muscle fibers. Fewer capillaries mean less oxygen, fewer nutrients, less removal of metabolic waste. It's a desert settling inside the muscle. Nitric oxide derived from the nitrates in beets stimulates angiogenesis, the formation of new blood vessels, through a pathway involving vascular endothelial growth factor, VEGF. In 2018, a study published in the Journal of Applied Physiology showed that seniors who consumed beet juice daily for 8 weeks increased blood flow to their leg muscles by 38% during exercise. But what almost no one knows is that the greatest benefit doesn't happen during exercise. It happens during rest, when the muscle is repairing itself. It is at this time that increased blood flow delivers amino acids and removes inflammatory cytokines, accelerating regeneration. I want you to visualize that. After a night's sleep, his muscles spent hours repairing. But if the capillaries are collapsed, the nutrients have not arrived, the toxins have not left, You wake up with heavy, stiff legs as if they haven't rested. It's not a lack of sleep. It's a lack of perfusion. The blood is not getting where it needs to be. And the beets, consumed in the right way, begin to reopen these vessels. It is not an aggressive vasodilation like that of a drug. It is a physiological vasodilation, gentle, which respects the rhythm of the body. Nitrates are converted to nitrite by the bacteria on the tongue, and this conversion is modulated by the pH of the mouth and the presence of vitamin C. Nitrite circulates, and when it encounters a tissue with low oxygenation, such as a muscle with collapsed capillaries, it is converted to nitric oxide right there, where it is needed most. It is an intelligent system of targeted delivery. Nature does not throw medicine everywhere. It delivers where there is a need. Now the mistake that completely nullifies the benefit of beets. Most people cook beets in boiling water for 20-30 minutes. Nitrates are water-soluble and thermosensitive. When you cook beets for too long, you lose up to 70% of the nitrates in the cooking water, which goes down the drain. And what's left in cooked beets is basically sugar and a little bit of fiber, but it's lost the compound that really matters to your muscles. The second mistake is peeling the beets. Beet peel contains betalains, pigments that are potent antioxidants that protect nitric oxide from oxidative degradation. Without betalains, the nitric oxide you have produced is neutralized by free radicals before it reaches the capillaries in your legs. The third mistake, and perhaps the most serious, is consuming beets without a source of vitamin C. Vitamin C stabilizes nitric oxide and prolongs its half-life in the circulation. Without vitamin C, nitric oxide degrades in fractions of a second. With vitamin C, it can act long enough to reach the furthest vessels. So the correct way to consume beets is to wash them well. Not peel them. Cut them raw into thin slices. Season with lemon and a pinch of sea salt. And eat it like this, like a salad. The heat of cooking should only be applied for a maximum of 5 minutes in the steam if you really prefer it cooked, and the steam water should be used in a broth or soup. The peel should remain, and lemon is not optional. Lemon is the cofactor that makes the system work. Without lemon, half of the benefit is lost along the way. Mrs. Noosa, 78 years old, had an additional problem. She had been taking omeprazole for more than 10 years for reflux. Omeprazole reduces stomach acidity, and the conversion of nitrite to nitric oxide depends on gastric acidity. With the stomach less acidic, the production of nitric oxide from dietary nitrates is compromised. This is an example of how a seemingly harmless medication, taken chronically, can sabotage a fundamental physiological mechanism. Donna Noosa could not simply suspend omeprazole, but she could consume raw beets with lemon and add a little apple cider vinegar to the salad to temporarily acidify the stomach and favor conversion. This is precision medicine using food. It is not replacing medicine. It is using food to correct a flaw that the medicine has created. Within a month, Mrs. Noosa reported that her legs were less heavy and that her willingness to walk had returned. She was still taking omeprazole, but the beets with lemon and vinegar were playing the role that her stomach could no longer do on its own. What happens in your body when you consume raw beets with peel and lemon? Bacteria on the tongue begin to convert nitrate into nitrite. Nitrite reaches the acidic stomach and forms nitric oxide. A part of this nitric oxide acts locally, protecting the gastric mucosa. Another part is absorbed and travels through the blood. When it reaches the muscles of the legs, it finds the collapsed capillaries and begins to dilate them. Blood flows back where it was once a stagnant swamp of inflammatory metabolites. Muscle fibers that were in chronic hypoxia, half asleep, receive oxygen again. The mitochondria of these fibers, which were working in emergency mode, begin to breathe normally. And at the same time, the betalains in the bark neutralize the free radicals that mitochondrial dysfunction was overproducing. It's like cleaning a dark room and opening the windows. The muscle sees the light again. Mr. Manuel started eating raw beets grated with lemon for lunch, along with a protein that I'll reveal in a moment. And in 3 weeks, he reported that the slope that looked like a mountain became a slope again. He didn't run up, but he climbed without feeling that the power had been cut off. This brings me to the third food, and here science gets even more fascinating, because it enters a territory that most people are completely unaware of: the connection between your gut and your muscles. There is an intestine-muscle axis that science has only begun to map in earnest in the last decade. The bacteria that live in your colon ferment fibers that you eat and produce short-chain fatty acids, mainly acetate, propionate, and butyrate. These tiny molecules cross the intestinal wall, fall into the circulation, and reach all tissues in the body, including the leg muscles. And what do they do there? They enter the mitochondria, serve as fuel, but also act as signaling molecules that tell the muscle cell's DNA to increase the production of new mitochondria. It is mitochondrial biogenesis. In 2021, a study from the University of Copenhagen, published in the Journal of Physiology, demonstrated that butyrate, a short-chain fatty acid, increased the oxidative capacity of muscle fibers in older adults by 22% after 6 weeks of supplementation. But you don't need supplement. You need the food that feeds the right bacteria. And that food is oats. But again, the devil lives in the detail. The oats that most people consume are thin, pre-cooked rolled oats, often mixed with sugar and flavorings in the individual sachets. These oats have undergone an extrusion process that broke down their long fibers into fragments that are digested very quickly, generating a glucose spike that stimulates insulin, and chronically high insulin is one of the factors that worsen anabolic resistance. You eat oatmeal thinking you are taking care of your health, and you are generating an insulin peak that blocks the use of fat as energy and also contributes to intramuscular fat infiltration. The mistake is to consume processed oats. The oats that matter to your muscles are whole grain oats, or, at the very least, oat bran, which concentrates beta-glucans, the soluble fibers that the good bacteria in your colon love to ferment. These beta-glucans, when they arrive intact in the large intestine, are consumed by bacteria of the genus Fiacalibacterium and Roseburia, which produce butyrate in abundance. Butyrate travels through the blood and reaches the muscle. There it inhibits histone deacetylases, enzymes that compact DNA and make it difficult to read genes. When butyrate inhibits these enzymes, the DNA opens up and allows the genes responsible for producing new mitochondria to be read and translated. It's like taking a lock out of your cell's instruction manual. The muscle regains the ability to produce energy efficiently, and it doesn't stop there. Butyrate also reduces intestinal permeability, which allows fragments of bacteria to enter the bloodstream and trigger the systemic inflammation that is eating away at your muscles. So whole grain oats work on two fronts. It feeds the bacteria that produce the fuel that repairs mitochondria, and at the same time it closes the gaps in the gut that were fueling inflammation. Think about it with me. Your gut has a surface area the size of a tennis court. A single layer of cells separates the outside world, with its bacteria and toxins, from your bloodstream. This barrier is maintained by tight junctions between cells. With age, with stress, with poor diet, these junctions can loosen. Pieces of dead bacteria, lipopolysaccharides, cross the barrier and fall into the blood. Your immune system recognizes these invaders and triggers systemic inflammation. This inflammation reaches the muscles and activates the NF-kappa B pathway, which degrades muscle protein. It's a vicious cycle. The butyrate produced by the bacteria that ferment whole oats strengthens these tight junctions. It is the preferred food of colon cells, colonocytes. When colonocytes receive butyrate, they proliferate, strengthen, tighten the junctions. The barrier closes. Systemic inflammation decreases. The muscles breathe a sigh of relief. This is the gut-muscle axis at work, and it all starts with a porridge of oatmeal grains left to soak overnight. Dona Yolanda, 75 years old, widowed, lived alone and was afraid of falling. She had already fallen once, fractured her wrist, and, since then, walked with short steps, looking at the ground. The fear of falling is one of the biggest predictors of loss of strength in the legs, because the person reduces activity, muscles atrophy, balance worsens, and fear increases. It is a cruel cycle. Dona Yolanda drank tea with toast every night. I thought it was light, healthy, but white bread toast generated insulin spikes and provided no fiber to gut bacteria. We replaced the toast with a porridge of oatmeal grains left to soak overnight and cooked slowly with a pinch of cinnamon. Cinnamon is not just flavor. Cinnamon contains cinnamaldehyde, a compound that improves insulin sensitivity and helps direct glucose to the muscle instead of converting it into fat. It is a synergism that enhances the effect of oats. In 2 months, Mrs. Yolanda reported that she started walking again, looking ahead. The fear wasn't completely gone, but she trusted her legs more. The base was firmer. Evening whole grain oatmeal has done more for her than years of generic recommendations to walk further. The correct preparation of oats is another detail that nullifies the benefit if it is ignored. Oatmeal should be left to soak in filtered water for 12 hours. This process, called soaking, activates the enzyme phytase, which breaks down phytic acid. Phytic acid is an anti-nutrient that binds to zinc, magnesium, calcium, and iron, preventing its absorption. If you don't soak oats, phytic acid travels through your gut and sequesters these minerals essential for muscle function. Magnesium, for example, is needed for more than 300 enzymatic reactions, including the production of ATP, the energy currency. Without bioavailable magnesium, your mitochondria can't use the oxygen that beets help deliver. It is a waste of resources. After soaking, the water should be discarded and the oats should be cooked in new water over low heat for 20 to 30 minutes until soft and release the starch slowly. This slow cooking preserves the beta-glucans and allows the starch to gelatinize so that digestion is gradual without glucose spikes. Adding cinnamon at the end of cooking, with the heat already off, preserves the cinnamaldehyde, which is thermosensitive. Eating this warm porridge at night provides the substrate for bacteria to produce butyrate during the night. And while you're sleeping, butyrate is traveling to your muscles, opening up DNA, stimulating mitochondrial biogenesis, closing the gaps in your gut. You wake up with less inflammation and more energy potential. Those who are watching now and are taking this information seriously have already understood that it is not a miracle food. It is a sequence of metabolic signals that need to be activated in the right order. And that brings me to the fourth food, which is perhaps the most controversial and the most misunderstood of all: saturated fat. I know you grew up hearing that saturated fat clogs arteries, but what the latest studies are showing is that demonizing saturated fat has led to an increased consumption of refined vegetable oils and carbohydrates that are directly linked to muscle inflammation and anabolic endurance. The food I'm talking about is sardines. Canned sardines, preserved in water or olive oil, not in soybean oil. Sardines contain eicosapentaenoic acid, EPA, and docosahexaenoic acid, DHA, two long-chain omega-3 fatty acids that have a specific function that few people know about. They are incorporated into the membrane of muscle cells and increase the fluidity of this membrane. A more fluid membrane responds better to insulin, responds better to amino acids, responds better to the mechanical stimulus of exercise. In addition, EPA is converted into resolvins, maresins, and protectins, which are lipid mediators specialized in resolving inflammation. They are not anti-inflammatories that block inflammation in any way. They are pro-resolutive, that is, they actively signal the immune system to end the inflammatory process and begin repair. It is a fundamental difference. While chronic low-grade inflammation sits on like a dim lamp day and night consuming your muscle, resolvins go in and out of that lamp. A 2020 study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition showed that seniors who consumed sardines 3 times a week for 6 months had an increase in quadriceps strength that was 8% greater than the control group, and C-reactive protein dropped to levels comparable to those of middle-aged adults. But the mistake that nullifies the benefit of sardines is the same mistake that haunts all the foods I've mentioned so far: the side dish. Most people eat sardines with French bread, white rice, or mashed potatoes, refined and high glycemic index carbohydrates. When you do this, insulin rises, and high insulin inhibits the delta-6 desaturase enzyme, which is responsible for lengthening and desaturating shorter-chain fatty acids. In other words, the insulin spike blocks the conversion of omega-3s into their most active forms. You eat the sardines, but the body can't use the full potential of EPA and DHA because insulin is getting in the way. The second mistake is to consume fried sardines. Excessive heat oxidizes omega-3 fatty acids, which are highly unsaturated and very susceptible to oxidation. Fried sardines may contain oxidized lipids that, instead of reducing inflammation, increase it. The correct way is to consume canned sardines preserved in olive oil. Lightly drain the excess oil, but do not wash it and eat it with a dark green salad. The leafy greens provide nitrates and vitamin C, creating a synergy with beets, eggs, and oats. It is a system. Each food enhances the other. Inside your body, the DHA in sardines travels to the muscle cell membrane and inserts into the lipid bilayer. There it displaces pro-inflammatory omega-6 fatty acids that were taking up space. The membrane becomes more fluid, insulin receptors move more easily, glucose enters the cell with less resistance. At the same time, EPA begins to be converted into resolvin E1, which travels through the muscle interstitium and signals macrophages to stop releasing inflammatory cytokines and start clearing cellular debris. The muscle that was inflamed, stiff, and weak begins to loosen. Strength doesn't come overnight, but the biochemical basis for strength is being rebuilt. And when you combine that with the egg for breakfast, the beets for lunch, and the oatmeal at night, all four pathways are being activated simultaneously. The acetylcholine pathway, the nitric oxide pathway, the butyrate pathway, and the resolvin pathway. No 15-minute consultation could explain this. The system treats leg weakness as an isolated symptom and prescribes analgesic, anti-inflammatory, or, at best, physical therapy. But the root of the problem lies in cell signaling, low-grade inflammation, mitochondrial dysfunction, and anabolic resistance. And these four mechanisms cannot be solved with a single remedy. They are resolved with a dietary pattern that was designed by evolutionary biology and that modern science is just redesigning. Now I want to talk about the fifth food, and here the revelation gets even heavier. Because there is a silent villain who is sabotaging the strength of your legs, and he is disguised as healthy. Sunflower oil, corn oil, soybean oil. These refined vegetable oils, known as seed oils, are rich in linoleic acid, an omega-6 that, in excess, competes with omega-3 for the same enzyme, delta-6 desaturase. When you consume too much omega-6, you hijack the enzyme that should be converting the omega-3 in sardines into EPA and DHA. The result is an uncontrolled production of arachidonic acid, which is a precursor of pro-inflammatory eicosanoids such as series 2 prostaglandins and leukotrienes. These substances inflame muscles, increase pain, and worsen anabolic resistance. The worst, these oils are in almost all industrialized products, in cookies, in margarines, in ready-made seasonings, in salad dressings that claim to be healthy. You can be eating sardines, eggs, beets, and oatmeal and still sabotaging everything with salad dressing made with soybean oil. The information I'm going to give now is hard, but necessary. If you really want to regain the strength of your legs, you need to eliminate seed oils and replace them with extra virgin olive oil. Olive oil contains oleocanthal, a phenolic compound that inhibits cyclooxygenase, the same enzyme that ibuprofen inhibits, but without the gastric and renal side effects. Oleocanthal reduces local inflammation in the muscles and also protects LDL particles from oxidation. And olive oil is the ideal vehicle for seasoning raw beets, finishing sardines, and cooking eggs over low heat. It is the common thread that unites all the previous foods. But the fifth food is not olive oil. Olive oil is the supporting actor. The fifth food is a source of protein that surpasses eggs and sardines in leucine density, and that, consumed at dinner, can stimulate muscle protein synthesis during sleep, when most of the repair takes place. I'm talking about cottage cheese. Cottage cheese is a fresh, low-fat cheese, but rich in casein, a slow-digesting protein that forms a clot in the stomach and releases amino acids into the bloodstream gradually over 6 to 8 hours. While you sleep, cottage casein feeds your muscles with leucine, isoleucine, and valine, the branched-chain amino acids that are the most potent signal for activating mTOR. A 2012 study published in the Journal of Nutrition showed that consuming casein before bed increased nighttime muscle protein synthesis by 22% in older adults. But the mistake that cancels out this benefit is to consume cottage with acidic fruits, or worse, with sugary jams. Sugar generates insulin peaks, which divert metabolism to fat stores and take the focus away from muscle repair. The ideal is to consume the cottage neat, with a pinch of sea salt and a drizzle of olive oil, or with pumpkin seeds, which I will mention next. Another mistake is to consume low-fat cottage if you don't have a specific gallbladder problem or intolerance. The small amount of fat that whole wheat cottage contains helps in the absorption of fat-soluble vitamins and modulates insulin release. Skim isn't necessarily better for your muscles. Milk fat contains conjugated linoleic acid, CLA, which in animal studies has been shown to reduce muscle mass loss under conditions of catabolic stress. Inside your body, at night, cottage casein forms a gel in your stomach. Digestive enzymes slowly break down this protein matrix, releasing amino acids that enter the portal vein and go to the liver. The liver, which at night is in fasting mode, receives these amino acids and, instead of converting them into glucose, packages them into plasma proteins and distributes them to the tissues. The muscles of the legs, which during the day were stimulated by walking, by climbing stairs, by the exercises you did, have their signaling pathways open, thirsty for amino acids. Casein arrives slowly, with no peaks, and feeds the reconstruction fiber by fiber. The mitochondria that oats helped multiply now have substrate to produce ATP. The nitric oxide that the beets generated keeps the capillaries open for oxygen to reach these mitochondria. The DHA in sardines keeps the membranes fluid so that nutrients enter and waste leaves. The acetylcholine in the egg keeps the motor plate responsive for the next day, and olive oil extinguishes the foci of inflammation that the seed oils ignited. It's a nightly concert of regeneration that takes place while you sleep, and you wake up with your legs less heavy, more willing, more yours. Now we come to the sixth and final food. And this is the most surprising because it does not act directly on the muscle. It acts on the brain. And the connection between the brain and leg muscles is more intimate than anyone realizes. There is a neurotransmitter called dopamine that is known for its role in pleasure and motivation. But dopamine is also critical for motor control. The substantia nigra, a region of the brain, sends dopaminergic projections to the basal ganglia, which modulate the initiation and fluidity of movements. With aging, dopamine production declines. This decline is subtle, but it directly affects the speed at which the brain recruits the muscle fibers in the legs. You want to walk fast, but the order arrives late and incomplete. The leg obeys, but with a fraction of a second delay and with fewer fibers recruited. The result is a feeling of weakness that is not muscular. It is neurological. And the raw material for dopamine is an amino acid called tyrosine. Tyrosine is converted to L-dopa by the enzyme tyrosine hydroxylase, and L-dopa is converted to dopamine. Without enough tyrosine, dopamine is not produced in adequate amounts. And the most accessible and inexpensive tyrosine-rich food out there is the pumpkin seed. Pumpkin seed contains tyrosine, magnesium, zinc, and tryptophan. Magnesium is a mineral that participates in more than 300 enzymatic reactions, including the production of ATP, the body's energy currency. Without magnesium, ATP is not biologically active. Zinc is a cofactor for the synthesis of testosterone and insulin-like growth factor, IGF-1, which are anabolic hormones that support muscle mass. In older adults, serum zinc is often low, and zinc supplementation has been shown to improve muscle strength in studies such as the one published in the Journal of the American Geriatric Society in 2016. Tryptophan is a precursor to serotonin, which regulates sleep. Poor quality sleep reduces growth hormone secretion, which is critical for nighttime muscle repair. So pumpkin seed works on three fronts. It provides the raw material for dopamine to improve muscle recruitment. It provides magnesium and zinc to support energy production and anabolic hormones, and it provides tryptophan to improve sleep that powers everything. But the mistake that nullifies the benefit of pumpkin seeds is to consume them roasted, salted, and unpeeled. Over-roasting oxidizes the polyunsaturated fatty acids that the seed contains, generating the same inflammatory compounds that we are trying to combat. Too much salt, if you're sensitive, can raise blood pressure and put a strain on your kidneys. And pumpkin seed shells, while rich in fiber, contain phytates that chelate zinc and magnesium, preventing their absorption. The correct way is to consume the pumpkin seed raw, without shell, preferably left to soak in water with a pinch of salt for 8 hours to reduce anti-nutrients, and then dried at a low temperature, below 60 degrees. It can be added to the nightly cottage, sprinkled over beet salad, or eaten plain as a snack between meals. The amino acid chelated zinc and magnesium in the seed are absorbed in the small intestine and transported to the muscles and brain. Tyrosine crosses the blood-brain barrier and fuels dopamine production. The result is faster and more complete muscle recruitment. Your legs don't get stronger overnight, but the communication between your brain and muscle gets more efficient. And that efficiency translates into power, balance, and confidence to move. Now, the climax of this conversation. The most amazing mechanism that science has revealed in recent years, and that connects all 6 of these foods in a way that no one is talking about in health videos. The gut-brain-muscle axis. The gut bacteria that oats feed produce butyrate. Butyrate doesn't just go to the muscle, it goes to the brain. It crosses the blood-brain barrier and acts on astrocytes, the support cells of neurons, stimulating the production of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF. BDNF is like a fertilizer for neurons. It promotes the survival of dopaminergic neurons in the substantia nigra. That is, the oatmeal you eat at night feeds bacteria that produce butyrate, which travels to the brain and protects neurons that produce dopamine, which in turn improves the recruitment of muscle fibers in your legs. It is a complete axis. Pumpkin seed provides the tyrosine that these neurons need to manufacture dopamine. Beets provide nitric oxide that dilates brain vessels and improves the arrival of oxygen and nutrients to these neurons. Sardines provide DHA that makes up the membranes of these neurons, keeping them fluid and responsive. The egg provides choline to acetylcholine, which transmits the order from the motor neuron to the muscle. And cottage food provides the protein that rebuilds the muscle that has been commanded. It is a closed, coherent system that nature has designed and that the food industry has fragmented into products that no longer communicate with each other. The traders in this story are the foods that pass themselves off as healthy and break every link in this chain. Margarine, which contains trans fats that stiffen cell membranes and hinder the arrival of dopamine. Industrialized wholemeal bread, which contains phytic acid and gluten in amounts that can inflame the intestine and reduce the production of butyrate. Natural fruit juice without fiber, which generates glucose and insulin spikes and blocks the conversion of omega-3s. The cereal bar with oatmeal and honey, which is basically sugar-shaped with a little fiber. These foods are everywhere. They are offered as healthy options in hotel breakfasts, in hospital snacks, in diets prescribed by outdated professionals. And every day that you consume these foods thinking you're taking care of yourself, the silent damage to your muscles and the neurons that control them accumulates. Weakness in the legs is not a sudden event. It is the sum of thousands of small daily aggressions that the system cannot repair because the right raw materials do not arrive. Think about the dimension of this. With every spoonful of margarine you spread on your bread, trans fats become embedded in the membranes of your motor neurons and make them stiff. The action potential, which is the electrical impulse that travels from the brain to the leg, encounters resistance. The message arrives late and with less intensity. The muscle fiber receives a weak stimulus and does not contract at full strength. Over time, the fiber that is not recruited atrophies. The muscle loses volume and strength. You feel that the leg is weaker and instinctively reduce activity. Less activity means less stimulation for the mitochondria, which degenerate even more. Fewer mitochondria means less energy, more fatigue, more reduced activity. It is a vicious cycle that begins with a banal act, spreading margarine on bread. And the industry continues to sell margarine as healthy because it is cheap, because it has a long shelf life, and because marketing can print a little heart on the packaging. But you now know. It is known that the whole egg cooked for 7 minutes provides phosphatidylcholine that rebuilds the myelin sheath. You know that raw beets with peel and lemon provide the nitrates that generate nitric oxide and reopen collapsed capillaries. You know that whole grain oats soaked and cooked slowly feed the bacteria that produce butyrate, which travels to the muscle and brain and triggers mitochondrial regeneration and neuronal protection. He knows that sardines and olive oil provide EPA and DHA that are incorporated into the membranes and converted into resolvins that erase chronic inflammation. You know that cottage provides casein that feeds the muscles during sleep. You know that raw, shelled pumpkin seed provides tyrosine, magnesium, and zinc that support dopamine, energy, and anabolic hormones. He knows that extra virgin olive oil is the common thread that protects, transports, and enhances all this. And he knows that seed oils, margarine, refined carbohydrates, and the so-called healthy industrialized ones are the traders who sabotage every step of this chain. I want you to imagine Mr. Jose, 79 years old, who has spent the last 10 years feeling his legs disappear little by little. He got used to walking around in slippers dragging his feet. He got used to asking for help to get up from the beach chair. He got used to refusing invitations to walk in the park with his grandchildren because he was embarrassed to ask to stop every 5 minutes. He thought it was age, that it was just like that there was no way. One day, his daughter, who watched content like this, changed his breakfast. Out the margarine in came the creamy hard-boiled egg. For lunch, a salad of grated raw beetroot with lemon and olive oil, accompanied by canned sardines. In the evening, an oatmeal and grain with cinnamon. Before bed, cottage with pumpkin seeds. In 3 months, Mr. Jose was not running, but he got up from his chair on the beach without offering his arm. He walked in the park with his grandchildren, and when he felt tired, he asked to sit for a while, but he didn't feel ashamed because the fatigue was muscular. It wasn't the failure of the system. The difference is subtle in the body, but immense in the soul. The loss of strength in the legs steals more than muscle. It steals autonomy. It steals spontaneity. It steals the joy of getting up and going. And what science is showing, with increasingly robust studies, is that this theft is not inevitable. It's orchestrated by mechanisms that can be modulated by what you put on your plate. I'm not saying that food replaces medical follow-up. This content is educational and complements, never replaces, your doctor's assessment. But the truth is that most consultations don't have time to explain the gut-brain muscle axis. There's no time to teach that the beetroot peel is as important as the pulp. There is no time to warn that margarine sabotaged what the egg tried to build. The system is designed to put out fires, not to prevent the spark from turning into fire. And the spark, in the case of your legs, is low-grade inflammation, mitochondrial dysfunction, anabolic resistance, and neurological signaling failure. 4 mechanisms that can be fought with 6 foods as long as they are used correctly. Now, the decision is in your hands. You can finish this video and continue doing what you've always done. Or you can go to the market, buy a beetroot in shell, a dozen eggs, a jar of oatmeal grains, a can of sardines and olive oil, a jar of cottage cheese, and a packet of raw pumpkin seeds. You can prepare your first meal with the intention of feeding not only hunger, but the metabolic pathways that will rebuild the foundation of your body. And you can, in the coming weeks, pay attention to the small signs. The climb of the stairs that became less breathless. The descent of the sidewalk that did not need the support of the pole. The desire to walk that reappeared without being summoned. These are the true markers of success. It's not the number on the scale. It's not the flawless blood test. It is the leg that responds again when you call. Share this video with someone you love who is feeling their legs weaken. Don't share it like someone who sends a health tip. Share it as someone who reaches out and says, I discovered something that can help us walk together for longer. Because at the end of the day, leg strength isn't about muscles. It's about being present. It's about meeting the one you love without having to calculate the distance. It's about living the years you have with the dignity of moving through the world in your own strength. And that, my friends, is something that is worth much more than any like or subscription. It's worth the life you still have to live.